Hello, and welcome to British Cartographic Society Teatime Talk. My name is Chris Rebutis, and the coordinator of the Teatime Talks and today's chair. Welcome to another of our Map Memoirs series. Today we have three speakers. That's Paula Williams, Gerry Zierler, and Mick Ashworth. And to start us off, I'm going to pass us over to Paula.
Good evening, everybody. How lovely to have a chance to talk to you about my first map. Let's see if we can, there we go. Good screen share. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Paula Williams, and I'm a curator of maps, mountaineering and polar collections at the National Library of Scotland. I am also convener of the Map Curators Group of the British Cartographic Society. My relationship with maps has been long-standing, as you're about to find out. So before I was at the National Library of Scotland, I had the privilege of cataloguing the Todd Hunter Allen collection at the Bodleian Library, and my degree was in geography from Aberdeen, which included modules, as they would now be known, on cartography, remote sensing and surveying. Those of me who knew, people who knew me when I was studying to become a librarian, always say, oh, but you wanted to work with maps. You've always wanted to work with maps. And I can remember when I was in secondary school, loving geography because it meant that I could work with maps and I could draw little bits to go into my projects and my design, and it was great fun. So when Seppi asked me if I would be willing to do a talk tonight, the very first thing that came to mind was my first map. My first map was the Children's Map of London, made by Leslie G. Bullock and published by Bartholomew's. I received it as a Christmas present when I was about 8 years old, I think in my Christmas stocking. I've since asked my parents why they gave it to me, and they have no memory of it whatsoever. But for me, it obviously had a long-lasting impression. My copy had the rather cheery-looking Jolly Guardsman that you can see on the screen here, rather than the slightly severe-looking one of the first edition, published in November 1938, and ran the editions over at least the next 30 years. There were a few updates to place names, but the updates seemed to have been a bit incomplete and a bit patchy. But what a delight for an 8-year-old, a map with dragons on it. As the reviewer of the Times said back in 1938 when it was first published, they described it as a map of bright colours and pretty fancies, and this very much appealed to the 8-year-old me. In the blog Mapping London, Ollie O'Brien and James Cheshire described it as a good balance of style and function. A simple yellow, red, blue colour scheme is adopted for all the buildings and stations so that the map is not overloaded with colour. And of course, it's relatively easy to print as well. Gog and Magog feature boldly. Known now as mainly for being statues in the Guildhall, their effigies of them have been carried in the Grand Watch and coronation processions through the city from the time of Queen Elizabeth I. Derived from the mythology about the creation of the city of London, or New Troy as it was thought to have been, by Brutus, who captured and chained the giants Gog Magog the Albion and Corineus the Briton. They've become guardians of the city, and here they are, flanking the map, looking after everything within it. To me, aged 8, from a small town, the population about 2,000, the city seemed positively magical. I used to drive my dinky and matchbox cars around on the streets and the layout on the map. Mine was a lovely folded version with a linen back and was quite robust, which is a good thing given that I was driving my cars around on it. And I would navigate from one side, from Gog to Magog and back again, taking complicated routes through places I had never been, and loving every minute of it. The appeal to an 8-year-old is clear. The colour, the clarity, the little rhymes, the scroll showing you where places are. And it wasn't until much later, a full 10 years later, that I finally ventured to the city. And I think I was maybe a little disappointed to discover that the buildings weren't really gold and yellow and that they didn't all have red and blue roofs. And indeed, that it wasn't as easy to find its way around as it appeared on the map. But the animals and poems very much sang to me at aged 8. And as you can tell, have maybe influenced what I like now in a map. I like them to be clear. I like them to be bright. I like them to tell me more than just the layout of a place. So Leslie Bullock was born in 1895 in London. He served in World War I, joined the RAF, was a bomber pilot for a couple of years after the war, and joined the civil service in 1920. The civil service brought him to Scotland, and there he began a correspondence with Bartholomew's map-making firm, offering them some of his hobby pictorial maps. They took him up on the offer of a pictorial map of Glasgow, which they published as the Pictorial Plan of Glasgow to coincide with the Empire exhibition, which opened in Bellahouston Park in May 1938. It was a popular choice, and on the back of that, they then went on and published the Children's Map of London later the same year. All the royalties from the map were given to Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children at Bullock's request. Bullock went on to create a whole series of illustrated historical maps for Bartholomew's, including Scotland, Ireland, England and Wales, and he also created a world map for the signing of the League of Nations. Following his retiral, he wrote the Children's Book of London, a lovely history designed to travel round his children's map, and including these rather attractive other small maps. And the larger map folds out at the back. Bullock and his wife became regular visitors to the Bartholomew family. And the Bartholomew Archive is held here at the National Library of Scotland, and we have some of his correspondence talking about them visiting and dropping in for tea next time that they're in Edinburgh. He corresponded about all the different revisions of the map, about their style, about their new covers. But more excitingly, I think, the maps take you to places that maybe you don't expect. I know it's a map of London, but it doesn't feel like modern day London. And there's a small quotation here on the screen where he uses the map to tell part of the story in his children's book. I'll just give you a moment to read that. I like the idea that you have to look at the map first and then work out where you're going. I know I have been bumped into so many times by students here in Edinburgh looking at their phone trying to find their way. And if only they looked at the map and learned it, then this wouldn't happen. But here at the National Library of Scotland, also in the Bartholomew Archive, we have some of the original drawings for the Bullock illustrated maps. And imagine my delight a few years after I was 8 years old of coming across this, the black and white original drawing before all the colour was put on by the printing. Here we have our dragons and the County of London. Little could the 8-year-old Paula know that some years later she would be working with these original drawings of the map that was the first one she was ever given. And whether it really set me on the course that my life and my career has taken, I'm not entirely sure, but I do really like to think that it did. Thank you.
Paula, thank you very much for that. Very interesting and a nice, well, just very nice. Nice that it all came to the, well, again, it's like we've had previous talks. It became, well, went full circle to an extent that you went back to the that you've come back, that you actually got to see, actually got to the source of where it all came from. Okay, right. So to continue on, we're going to move on to Gerry.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Christopher. Sorry to keep you waiting, everyone. I've been a BCS member now for several decades, and also of Charles Close Society, and also it's a chair for the last 10 years. I'm a serious collector of maps, but I've never been a professional cartographer. Sure, I'd drawn plenty of maps as a kid, and especially transport maps for some reason. I'd even diagrammatized all the London railways, beating British Railways by several years. As a cadet, I'd learnt navigation using the trusty OS 1-inch. And also at school, I took part in the second land use survey of Essex too. As a young adult, I'd published a series of maps on radio and television broadcasting areas, which I was involved with, and later learnt fairly easily to navigate while flying. When my 6-year-old son at the time showed precocious talents as a map maker, I began to ask, why did we both have this unexplained interest? Well, about the same time, they cracked the human genome. And it was plain that there was a family map gene. But where had it descended from? Larman Luck is the answer. My English grandfather, who I never knew, but am slowly and still learning more about. This presentation uses some of the contents of his field notebook from World War I, or message book it's properly called, which my mother has safely preserved. And some of the maps that we've used today, possibly made by him and used by his brother, both of them fighting in the Somme in World War I, certainly in 1917. So this is a retrospective tribute to him and some of his work, and I hope you'll agree from this snapshot that he was a brilliant artist and map maker, and not least wit. The numbers on some of these slides you'll see at the bottom are the page numbers in this 100-page book. It's only about 6 inches by 4 and leather bound and terribly flimsy. So we've had a photographic copy made of it some years ago, and I've rescanned some of these. This has lost a bit of the vibrant color of magenta and turquoise, but it's still a map that I look on for inspiration. It's headed, I'll read it because it's a bit faint. It says Cavalry Brigade, 8th and 9th of July, 1917. And this is a raid that grandfather Larman was involved with. And it's from a place called Agincourt near Saint-Quentin or Saint Quentin. And the newspaper cutting attached to it says that 35 prisoners were taken. I've compared this probably with Peter Chassot's help, but I've looked at the German trench maps for the same time and place, and it's absolutely the same. This arrow coming from the bottom left corner, I don't know if you can see my small cursor here, up through these 4 routes here and back where the route they took. That is done entirely by my grandfather. Here is one of the many beautiful illustrations in this little notebook. This is headed Bomb-Proof Dugout, Topographical Department, Foucault, March 1917. And I owe it to my old chum, Rob Kirk, who was news editor at Sky, and who spotted this on page 62 of this flimsiest of books that I'd taken out to the Western Front with him. And he noticed what was on the tables here. If I can wiggle my cursor around, you can see on one table, two tables, there are maps. I never knew until that point, a few years back, that grandfather had been a cartographer. Apart from the maps on the table, I don't know if you can notice everything's labeled here, but on the top it says map boxes as food store. And of course, the reason you used these and hung them to the wall was to stop the rats getting at the food before you did. This, I think, from the contiguous page number and the look of it, is the other end of the same dugout. And look, more maps in the rack on the wall and sandbags along the top there. And holding the door shut was this contraption of a rope or wire going over a cog, which is part of a motorcycle, it says there. And at the bottom, I'll just read that caption. It says, unexploded German 77mm shell without fuse, luckily. And notice the illumination on the table, the candle. If he didn't use a one-hair paintbrush for this, it was probably pen and ink. Here's a later one. It's the last numbered page in the book, so I don't know where this fits in the timetable, but this was probably, it was certainly at Christmas, because it says that on the top. And it was from a village, as far as we know, called, let me get this right, Monchy-Lagache, which is just west of Saint-Quentin, near Péronne, which was pretty well nuked by the Germans as we fought them out. And the famous wreckage of the town hall is now displayed in the Historial Museum in Péronne, with a big German sign on it, on which they'd written, let me get this right, Nicht ärgern, nur Wunder. Don't be angry, but wonder, or something like that. And that was also drawn in situ by my grandfather. And this very morning, I compared the two, and they're frighteningly similar, if you allow for his typical English problem of misspelling the German. Here he is. This is Laaman Luck. It's a self-portrait. It does look like him. I think he's got glasses on there, but I'm not too sure. Would you wear glasses in action? I don't know. But I've only in the last week discovered in my mother's archive a tin box containing all his spectacles. And I put some of them on and gave Mama a bit of a shock. She could see the likeness. She's probably making it up. She's 94, but hey. This is headed something in the city! Exclamation, somewhere in France. Which reminds me, of course, that Laaman's brother, Bernard, was out there, whose maps I've inherited. Censorship prevented messages with detailed positions, of course, but we do know that Laaman arranged to meet his brother Bernard, some of whose own maps we'll see in a minute, and they had some sort of rendezvous code. And my late cousin, his son, said Bernard used to put the last letter of the line of text, and they would spell out their rendezvous when you put those letters together. Who knows if that's true? It's a lovely story. Here's another witty cartoon from grandfather Laaman. It's called Gathering Flowers Under Difficulties at Le Verquier, 2nd of July, 1917. That's a classic bit of understatement, isn't it? But since that village is miles away near Avignon, I think he means La Vacquerie, which features in one of Bernard's maps. So I do wonder if that's where they met. We'll see it in a minute. Here's another cartoon from Larman, the tin hat or steel helmet. In the middle is what it really looks like. At the top, what it feels like to carry, 1/2 ton by the look of it. I'm sorry about the missing corner. It's very fragile, this book. But that's what it feels like to wear when there's a whiz-bang going off above you. It's just a pimple on your head. And to balance things out, here's the Hun's helmet, or I think they were called coal scuttles, complete with bullet hole through the top. It's obviously given the German gentleman a haircut. And down below is the parcel labelled to England. And the story goes that this helmet was actually sent by grandfather home to Wanstead, now in East London. And it really did reach there, mother assures me. Unfortunately, it got buried in the garden, so it's somewhere under the A12 now. Here's one of Bernard Luck's maps, and you'll see that village I mentioned, La Vacquerie, down the bottom. This is annotated with the blue lines. Run my cursor over them now, if you can see them to the right there, just north of La Vacquerie. And I showed this to a man called Filip Goshansky, who is a Polak Frenchman who's self-taught in English. So pretty difficult to understand. But I stayed in his hotel in Cambrai, and he said, where he is expert, and he's exhumed a British World War I tank as well, and put it on display there, which is quite remarkable. 6 meters down, he got the spot right. And he looked at this and he said, but this is from the first day of the tank battle. He's talking about the Battle of Cambrai. And he says this was the, let me get this right, the objective, the achieved second objective of the attack on the German lines, the Hindenburg line. You can see the word Hindenburg at the top here. Hindenburg support line, that is. And with the aid of massed tanks, we made a considerable impression on Flequières, where he exhumed this tank just to the north, and on Cambrai itself. So it does make me wonder if this is La Vacquerie and whether Bernard met Larman there. Kind of sobering. Here's another map of Bernard's. I show you this. It's a 10,000 trench map. The red are the German lines, and you can see that Bernard has drawn in this quadrant here gun ranging lines over the German trenches. And again, my friend Rob Kirk marched me over the fields to this spot here where his dividers had actually punctured the map. So this is presumably where he or his gun was. And we looked down over this area here, and he made me perform to camera as I spieled about this map. But it was a sobering experience to stand in exactly the same spot. You could actually reach down into the earth on this tilled field and pick up bits of shrapnel, even just a few years ago. And to conclude, here's a couple of pages from the preface of Grandpa Larman's field message book, as it's properly known. Notice the writing underneath that title: for the use of dismounted regimental officers, and which he was non-commissioned officer of cavalry and infantry. And on the left there is where he and later his offspring lived. My mother is still down near Folkestone. I just draw your attention to the bottom two, because this comes from the period where he was a Royal Engineer attached to the 59th Divisional Headquarters Map Section and the 5th Cavalry Division of British Expeditionary Force Map Section. On the right, you can see the second page of places where he was stationed during that part of the First World War. So this little map is my retrospective inspiration, if you like. It gives me succor to think that this is where the map genes of me and my son came from. 105 years ago now, he drew this. It's only about 4 inches square. And it explains, I hope, I love everything mappy. So thank you, Larman, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Gerry. That was very interesting, and it's a lovely to see that relic that you that you have, and it's just a wonderful story attached to it.
Thank you.
Okay, right. So now we'll continue on with our final talk for today, and I'd like to pass over to Mick.
Great, thanks for those previous talks. Fascinating stuff and great variety of mapping. Just to begin, a brief introduction to myself. Yeah, for those that don't know me, I'm a geographer, cartographer, studied in Leicester for my degree and then Glasgow for my postgrad diploma in cartography. What followed then were 15 years or so working for the Ministry of Defence mapping organisation, the mapping and charting establishment as it was. Don't know what it's called now. I think it's something like Defence Geographic Centre, or I think they even started using the word intelligence in the name of the establishment, but I couldn't help noticing that was only after I'd left. From there, I joined HarperCollins Publishers up in Glasgow, which is where I still live. Worked with them in their geographic division as managing editor and editor-in-chief for Times Atlases and Collins Atlases and Maps for a period of about 12 years. And 15 years ago, I left there and we set up our own small mapping company called Ashworth Maps and Interpretation, also based in Bishopbriggs in Glasgow. That's myself and my wife, Jennifer. And 20 years ago, I was president of the BCS. It's a scary amount of time. But my map memoirs are from before that time, from before my degree even, and I'm managed to narrow it down to 2 maps, one from the 60s and one from the 70s. I'll just try and share my screen now, Christopher. So yes, the map, I've divided them into 2, 1960s, 1970s. The 1960s one is this one, and this won't look too startling to anybody. It's a pretty standard Ordnance Survey. Map Ordnance Survey have to feature in these map memoirs, don't they? 25,000 map. Why is this particular one special? Obviously because it's of my home area, which is Blackburn in Lancashire. And why is it the map special? Because it covers places that were very dear to me and it tells the story largely of my upbringing, my childhood and my youth. So indulge me as I look at one small section of this map. If that's working. Just waiting for the next slide. It doesn't seem to be changing. There we go. Southwest of Blackburn, this map, yeah, holds a lot of memories for me, and they're special places, but I became fascinated with the way that places that were special to me in real life were represented on the map. The house I was born in will be pretty near the center of this map. And I'll just talk you through some of the places that were special to me as I was growing up. To the left of the map, the west, in Fenniscoles. Fenniscoles is a village that I was brought up in. You'll see industrial establishments there. Those 2 paper mills, the one on the left is the Sun paper mill, where I spent many summer holidays, Easter holidays, away from university, working there as a student in filthy conditions and amongst some very interesting characters. We were poor cousins to the Star paper mill. So we were the Sun, this is the Star. That was a very upmarket, glossy paper, very clean sort of place. Further along the canal towards Blackburn, there's also an eclipse mill to go with the sun and the star. And historically, there was a moon mill, which I'm not sure whether it was a corn mill or another paper mill, but that burnt down long before I was around. But it gives the true indication that this was that Blackburn was a very industrial town at that time. Further along from the mills, you will pass a 3-arch bridge, a very distinctive railway viaduct. The railway's not there now. That was closed during beaching, but there's a 3-arch bridge there, which is a very distinctive feature within Fenny-Scolls and within Blackburn. And just up the road from there was where my granny lived. So you're getting the full story here. Fenny-Scolls, there's a little Methodist church there where we as a family attended. There's a hall near the school. The primary school is here, near the hall there where I learned to play badminton. Further along in Cherry Tree, the next village, that was home to Cherry Tree Tennis and Cricket Club, where I played both those sports becoming a bit of a feature here. And then Mill Hill, another area within Blackburn, meant a lot to us. That's where my dad worked in a cotton mill all his life, his father before him. And Mill Hill was where I learned the piano, but the main highlight for that period was that we had to travel by bus to and from our piano lessons, and the journey, or the short walk from the piano teacher's house to the bus stop for the bus back, was usually involved some sort of, well, special timing and a bit of a chase from all the urchins in Mill Hill, which was a bit of a rundown and rough area. So we fled for our lives after our piano lessons every week. Mill Hill was also, strangely enough, where I used to go for my haircut with my dad. My dad used to take me to the barbers there, and he was very appropriately called Mr. Hacking. Further around, this part of Blackburn would obviously be very special to me. This is Ewood. People will know Ewood Park as the home of Blackburn Rovers, so many a happy time spent there, many a sad time spent there. And then to the south, there are areas of lovely, lovely walks that we used to do from the house. One particular route was called the Tops, where we would always just head off for a walk around the Tops. And it meant a lot to me. So this is just my impression of this is that this map is almost a biography of my early life. And it shows me that maps can hold memories very, very tightly. And the map reflected my life. But then as I got more interested in maps themselves and fascinated by the way these places were shown, I started to read the map, and then I discovered new places through the map. So the process worked in reverse. The map recorded memories, but it also created memories as well. And what was interesting, I was only really interested in the map element here. If you take away the map, there's a lot of information there that didn't really mean very much to me. Back then, the map as an object wasn't of much interest. It was the subject matter and the map symbology that meant something to me. But I wasn't to know that this sort of information that's around it, plus the information on the map itself, was going to play a huge part in my career. So I wasn't to know that numerous elements on any standard map like this were going to play an important part. Scale, accuracy, all these things would crop up at various points through my career. Sheet identification, SD62. I didn't know then that there was a whole department in mapping and charting establishment that was dedicated to identifying sheets and editions to ensure safe use and common use between troops. And similarly, boundaries, there are only parish boundaries on this map, but more, well, local boundaries, but also international boundaries became a key feature to some of the work I was doing, particularly on the world atlases. Place names, similarly, I didn't then understand the importance of place names and the various alternative place names that you can get for places. There was a road in Fenny-Scolls called Stockclough Lane, but if people saw that on the map, they probably wouldn't have recognized it because it was purely known as Jam Pot Lane because there was a jam factory along it. And it's interesting now that colloquial names like that are starting to become features of maps, or certainly of geographic databases. Series and editions of maps. So there are many, many cartographic elements that would crop up throughout my career and come to mean an awful lot to me, cause me great anguish, but great pleasure as well. So this map as a whole, now the whole object, was quite significant in increasing my appreciation of cartography, what cartography was, and the full breadth of the subject. Leaving that aside, a bit of local history for you as well, but we'll move on to the 1970s. Now, a little bit different in this case. A map that appeared, or late 1970s, 1977, this supplement to The Guardian appeared. And it was a tribute and a celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Indian Ocean Republic of Sans Serif. And my dad, we got The Guardian delivered every day. So I was taking interest in newspapers there in the wider world, but this struck a chord with me. This was a description of the Republic, and with the intention, a very professionally put together 7-page supplement that was singing the praises of the Republic of Sans Serif. It described the Republic, it gave a geographical guide to it, mentioning the climate, how wonderful it was, the prospects for exploration for phosphates and oil, and how prosperous it could be. It gave a historical timeline right up to the days of the president, General M.J. Pica, even a photo of him looking very resplendent. Its historical timeline also went all the way back to Portuguese and Spanish colonization. All very convincing and news to a lot of people who were being sold this republic and being, advised that you really don't know about this wonderful place. But take a closer look. The Guide to the Republic says the population is 1.7 million people, which on 2 small islands that size doesn't sound like paradise to me. In the historical timeline, there's a mention of 1969 when power was seized by a general minion. And I like the photographic competition on the bottom right there, which was launched for Kodak to try and gather great photographs of Sans Serif to help sell the Republic. Closing date for the competition was noon today. But there was a map, so it must all be true. Let's look at the map in a bit more detail. Place names, very significant. Looking a bit more closely at the map, yeah, it's interesting shapes to the islands, interesting names. The name of the Republic's doubts can start featuring now. The name of the Republic, Sans Serif, would ring some bells immediately with some people, but not with many people, actually. Bodoni, the capital. Bodoni would sound a familiar term to some. The shape of the islands forming a semicolon shape, and the 2 islands known as uppercase and lowercase. It was all starting to make sense now. The beach area of Gill Sands, the 30 point at the southernmost point of the Republic. Monte Tempo was there. I didn't like the feeling that there was a 6,000 meter high mountain that close to the coast. I didn't think, well, that would be a pretty spectacular feature. So sure enough, anybody with any even slight knowledge of typography and printing would know that all these names and all the terminology here relates to those 2 fields. Even the native people known as the Flongs get their name from a printing term from back then. And sure enough, the giveaway obviously is the date of the publication, which is the 1st of April, 1977. Now this came at a time when I was beginning to wonder what I would do with myself after school. I was in high school then, studying for A-levels. Geography was my only subject of interest, apart from the sports, of course. It was also a time I was becoming quite aware of the graphic arts, and my favorite book at that time was the Letraset catalogue. Did people remember those? I spent hours looking at those. So I like the prospect of travel as well. So just the whole joke about this, but the way it was presented really, really appealed to me. But from a mapping point of view, looking back now, it taught me just how powerful maps can be. It added credence and authority to this 7-page special supplement in the newspaper. But it taught me that maps could be influential. I don't know whether they're all apocryphal stories, but apparently travel agents were pretty busy over the next 2 days trying to convince people who were wanting to fly there that this was all a joke. But the power of maps was illustrated by that. I realized that maps could be influential, they could be serious, they could be attractive, they could be fun. But it showed me that they were always fascinating as well. And cartography seemed like a pretty good option to me from where I was standing when I was 17-year-old. And that's, as it turned out, cartography was the way to go. That's me, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Yes. Okay, so thank you very much to all our speakers, and I would like to move on to the Q&A session. Okay, so I think the first one we'll go to is the fact that Neil is highlighting, saying to Gerry that if you go to the Royal Engineer Museum at Chatham, you may be able to discover more about your grandfather's activities during the war. So,
thank you very much. I had planned to go there, funnily enough, but thanks for the link, Neil.
And confirmation that the Defence Geographic Centre is the correct name as well.
Good.
So I have to say it's all been it's been very interesting seeing the range of talks that the three of you have selected, and the genuinely interesting stories that come from each of them.
I love that map of Paula's. I think that's honey.
Thank you. I love your grandfather's maps. I think they're great. No, mutual congratulations. We got very excited seeing them at the rehearsal.
I'd love to show them all, but hey, yes, it was
probably a whole talk in itself, I think.
It's marvelous researching them. I mean, it's blooming difficult, but you know, we're finding things as we speak down in Folkestone. There's masses of stuff from these 90-year-old. Something went ping pong.
It did.
Just a notification, I think, on someone's computer. Okay. Yes. So, yes. Question again, and this is a comment. And Frank, generally, people are quite happy for all the talks that we've received. One question to Mick. Does taking A-level geography and working holidays in filth paper mills expose people to cartography, or is that just you and me? That's from Peter.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, maybe it does. Interesting, but you know, a drawing office would be a million miles away from some of the places I worked in the paper mill, and I think if you've done the same, then you'd know a long way from it. The only connection I can see is that maps were then printed on paper, so maybe I fed into this process somewhere along the way.
Okay, and one for Paula. Did you actually manage to navigate London with your map?
I haven't tried. I have to say, I'm not very good at navigating London, so I resorted to an A to Z, and but having found the book, which I didn't actually know about or hadn't read any of before I was looking into it for this evening, I think it would be really interesting to take the book and do the kind of tour, because he takes you to a different bit of the map and then tells you about London's history roundabout. So I suspect that most of the things would still be findable and relevant, because it concentrates so much on the kind of well-known buildings and the main streets, and it would be quite good. Have to also admit that I've never actually driven in London and have no intention of doing so. So all that playing with the cars come to nothing.
Get on a bus.
Walk. It's really interesting.
Even better.
Yes.
Yeah, I have to say, I was just having just when you, Paula, just when you mentioned the history of the map, and I started having a quick glance, and I found a copy of got sight of the Glasgow map when I did a quick search.
It's lovely. It's a
And
great thing.
I
I
could
mean, all of them are actually. They're all beautiful in different kind of ways. I think the historical series are maybe a little bit outdated looking now, but still eminently collectible and really quite beautiful. Just lovely. And I really love the idea that this guy wasn't. I mean, I guess from his time in the RAF, he would have been familiar with maps, may have done some basic map making kind of background, but this was just really just a hobby that he kind of punted out to Bartholomew's, going, I've made these things, are you interested? And the original letters back are actually, we don't really publish that kind of thing. No. And then somebody's obviously gone, oh, actually, with this thing coming up in Glasgow, maybe we could give it a go. And that's where they kind of come from. But it's lovely having the letters as well as the original maps.
No, that's. I think you've had a wonderful. I think you've had a very good insight there yourself into the whole background and the additional story, which, well, most of us would be unaware of. So yes, it is genuinely very interesting to see what sort of things that the amateur map maker can produce, and and this is a very interesting. It's that interesting. Crossroads between and moving into art, so it's a very interesting development of how that came together. And I'm just checking, checking if anyone else has any further questions. Don't think we've got too many more questions, so I'll have to say no. It's been genuinely interesting listening to all your stories and seeing the maps that have played a influencing in your life. And I have to say it continues on the theme of how we've been going with all the other talks of how these maps are playing a part in people's lives. So as we've got no more questions, I think I'll just wind us up for now. So I have to say that so once again, genuinely thank you very much to all our speakers. It's been great hearing about the maps and your experiences with them. And I would like to then invite everyone to come to our next Teatime Talk that we'll be doing next month, which will be on our recently completed UK National Report about the state of the UK mapping and geospatial industry. This is conducted every 4 years and will be presented by myself, Alexander Kent, and Seppi Castari. So for today, thank you for coming. But for now, thank you and goodbye.